Good morning, and welcome to this week's episode of RCCT Soul Talk with myself, Sean, our media director, and Father Jay McGinnis, a retired priest who helps us out. This week, we are going to be talking about Advent. And what was kind of ruminating in my mind as we were preparing for this Christmas season is the difference that the church kind of has versus the secular world. As I'm sure all of you have had to notice, we've been listening to Christmas music in the stores since what?
I don't know. I don't go to stores anymore.
That's not always a bad thing, but I think the first Christmas decoration I saw in a store probably appeared in October, and I want to say the beginning of October rather than...
I would say you are probably right, because occasionally I do have to go into stores. So.
But I think I wanted to just compare it because in the church, we really kind of have a much more clear delineation, dividing line, however you want to phrase it, between what we would say is Advent versus our Christmas season itself.
Well, even with your October example, that even goes a month and a half before Advent.
Exactly. Absolutely. But I guess the thing is, when I was growing up, I never really appreciated the difference between the two. And we were a real big church-going family. It was an every week thing. We were all in religious ed. But I never really thought of Advent beyond, to be honest, beyond, I didn't even think of the Advent wreath. It was the candy. You know, the old calendars with the little chocolate in it that you'd have to find the day. That was the only time, even in church, that I remember hearing really the term Advent. It was your Advent calendar.
You know, it's funny because you say that, and wreath and calendar post-date my youth.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So, what was Advent like in your youth?
Advent was a time when we'd get ready. I don't say there wasn't much to it except in school, because I went to a Catholic school. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the nuns would, to get ready, to prepare, to make yourself ready for Christ. Mm-hmm. Okay? Other than that, and this was back in the day when we had a lot of, I don't know what you'd call them today, they don't exist anymore, but a lot of stores that had catalogs, brand names, Century, there were a lot of those. And we all had the catalogs for the stores. And so we'd spend the time going through the catalogs, making Christmas lists of things we wanted for Christmas.
Judo, sidebarring with that still exists, but now it's all an Amazon
Well, I suppose that's true.
That's the very real world that we live in now.
Yeah. One that kind of escapes me because I have become so techno-dumb. I'm dumbed down.
Well, it's just, I think it's interesting because I guess what I was kind of getting to is being in the church music side of things.
Right.
I don't remember there being a big line of you couldn't do Christmas music in my youth during Advent. Now I see it more, and I have mixed feelings on it only because from my perspective, I feel like kids don't know the hymns, the Christmas hymns that I grew up with. I mean, we used to have Bing Crosby or Nat King Cole singing. All of the, Away in a Manger, we'd hear on the radio.
Right.
You don't really hear Away in the Manger on the radio anymore.
No, we don't hear the religious aspect of Christmas music anymore.
With the exception of maybe O Holy Night, I would argue.
I very seldom hear that.
That's true, too.
I mean, every now and then Silent Night,
Yes.
but you get more of, Grandma got
Run over
over
by
a
the reindeer.
All I Want for Christmas, all of those type of things, chestnuts roasting by an open fire, although that goes back a ways too.
Mm-hmm.
But, basically that's the outer aspect. As far as the church goes, back in the day, well, I grew up in a time when music, my youth at least, was at a time that music was not emphasized in the church.
Mm-hmm.
It was absent in a lot of ways.
Really?
Yes, it would be. Well, first of all, the music that was Gregorian chant.
Even for a school mass and everything.
Well, yeah, the mass was in Latin.
Oh, well, yeah. That's right. It was pre-Vatican II, yeah.
I mean, I was
Sorry.
halfway through high school before any of the mass changed to English.
It must have been really... So there wouldn't have been really, in that term, there really wouldn't have been any type of Christmas or really anything that you probably would have been used to as
Christmas, yes.
music. Okay.
They would, that was a music festival time.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be all the hymns. Silent Night, or Come All Ye Faithful, maybe a little Away in the Manger, but since that was written by Martin Luther.
Do you know, until you said that, I actually never knew that.
So, it was, but, those type of songs were the only ones that popped up. Prior to that, there was the High Mass.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one Mass every Sunday. That was the music Mass.
And the others were just chant? Or
No, the
no,
others were not music.
So there wasn't even chant. Okay.
No, how could you clear the parking lot with masses on every hour if you had music?
What a different world.
It was, but that's because, again, I think part of it was we'd become so used to the liturgy in Latin,
Mm-hmm.
and very few people understanding the Latin. We understood, the priest would turn around and say, Dominus vobiscum. The Lord be with you.
Oh, yeah.
And the response would be, Ac spiritu tuo.
And with your
Your
spirit,
spirit.
which is the
Right.
changed correct
But-
one.
Back then, it was the altar boys, and I do emphasize the point boys,
Yes, because
who were responding, not the congregation.
and the girls weren't even allowed to be altar servers until
Until after I was ordained a priest.
okay, so that was the 70s.
70s. Late 70s.
So, but it's interesting because I feel like more in older times, and I don't mean just your youth, I mean even my youth, the secular and kind of the church aspect, there was more of a delineation in time. Like, we loved Christmas time growing up, but we couldn't or weren't allowed to watch any Christmas movie, and definitely not bring out the Christmas CDs because we were such a musical part. Actually, what was the big treat for us at Christmas was the record player would come out. And we would have, now we had CDs, we had tapes, but only at Christmas time.
Oh,
And it was special.
Okay.
And none of the kids were allowed to walk out heavy-footed, and you had to be very, very soft-footed.
Yes.
But it would be, the record player would come out just for Christmas, and we would bring out the Christmas albums.
Yes.
And my grandfather would actually get very mad at us if any of us had tried to sneak something Christmassy in, either musically or on the TV, if it weren't, for him, it was noon on Thanksgiving Day, when Santa Claus came down in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, then you can begin to decorate, then you can begin to watch Christmas movies, then you are allowed to move. And it's interesting now, I would say, because the church still has that with we're not decorating. It's kept for Advent, so it's very subdued. All of the churches at RCCT are very subdued right now, aside from their Advent display of the wreath.
Right.
And some of them are very ornate and very beautiful. I think we've done them very, very well. But the church is very plain.
Yes, yes, it is, but not to the point of being as plain as Lent.
Yes.
And that's a distinction because too often, okay, it is the purple, or as the church calls it, violet, vestments that are worn in Advent and in Lent, they kind of combine the two into the same thing, the same type of thing. And there is a little bit of conflux there in that they are a preparation period, and people feel the need for reconciliation. So it's a kind of a penitential time too in Advent.
Those of you who were, just sidebarring, those of you who were at OLC this weekend with Father Mike Lamarca, our pastor, he actually said, he tells all of the kids as he waved his violet vestments, He said, big hint, if the priest is in violet, time for confession. And there is kind of, like you said, that confluence of maybe equating them probably too much with each other, but yes.
Yeah, but they are similar. Mm-hmm. Except what the preparation is for is totally different. Mm-hmm. But again, getting back to Advent, Christmas, Advent is a time of preparation. In my youth, that time before Christmas was a time of preparation too. It wasn't that. We didn't, I remember as a young child, our Christmas tree would go up like on the 23rd of December, 22nd or 23rd. It would never go up before then.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I've been thinking about that a lot. Because so many of the older movies, particularly set around Christmas time, and I don't mean that disparagingly,
Right.
as I'm sure you know, they talk about, in the movies, they show that the tree's not pretty much done, quote and unquote, until Christmas Eve.
Right.
Like the dad goes and puts the star
on the top.
on Christmas Eve. It's not...
Right.
Nowadays, it was before Thanksgiving, I think I was driving and seeing people with their Christmas trees in their windows.
Oh, yeah, I know. And I must admit, hey, what can I say? My laziness, and I'll attribute it to my laziness for the fact that I had my Christmas tree up before anybody else.
Because it didn't go away from
Because
last
I didn't
year.
take it down from last year. So like on Thanksgiving or just before Thanksgiving, I said, oh, what the heck? And I started turning the lights on it again.
Well, but it is interesting because I would hazard, to me, and I think it's just maybe the state of the world, and I guess this is what I was kind of getting to, is I think the time of preparation before something big is actually important. And the church, because we observe that season of Advent, of that waiting, I think creates more of a joy when it finally comes. When you see the baby in the manger, and I'm still really persnickety because my mother could tell anybody, anytime I go to her house, I find all of her manger scenes, and she has several, and I hide all the baby Jesuses, and then I go and scoop up all the wise men, and I go put them throughout the house to represent that they're coming from disparate lands.
Yes, I remember you telling me about the time you tried to put baby Jesus back in Mary.
I did. As a little kid, this is just for humor, because my 5-year-old brain, my grandfather, always brought us to church, and he really was the person who instilled so much in us. But his way of bringing kids to church, he would tell them, you're allowed to bring one toy. It must be a quiet toy, but you can bring it so that you're not disturbing the people around us and they can focus and you can get used to going to Mass. And I loved manger scenes. And the one manger scene we had, all of the pieces were hollow, including Mary. So my 5-year-old brain, and God knows it was my 5-year-old brain, reasoned, because my mom had been pregnant with my brothers at the time, that Jesus should go into Mary. So I took the baby Jesus and tried to shove, in the middle of church, Jesus into the hollow Mary, because that's where he was supposed to be in my mind. And I never got in trouble, but it's one of those funny things, because that was always what it was. Jesus wasn't there yet. And I still observe that old tradition of, these people aren't there. You can set up the manger, but they're not there yet. And I think that it makes it so much more exciting when and one of my favorite times at church still is after Christmas, when what we used to do at St. Paul's, and we have done in the past at Christopher's, is the wise men would appear, but far away from the manger, right, in the other part of the church. And I always got so excited. Aside from We Three Kings being my favorite Christmas song, there was something about, oh, the kings are here. And it would just absolutely make me more excited for the Christmas season. Even though it was my favorite part, I had to wait for it, I was more joyful about it.
I think that's part of it. I think probably, and of course, I'm looking at this from my perspective, the fact of where we've come to or gone to in these recent years are, we have so anticipated Christmas with all the commercialism of this pre-Christmas, that by the time Christmas arrives, we're sick of it. We're sick of it. It's over. Take out the tree and put it for the garbage on December 26th.
Which is the second day of Christmas.
Which basically is, in the olden days, we used to celebrate Christmas, especially between Christmas and New Year's. Mm-hmm. People would visit, people would get together, people would, just celebrate the holiday season together. And you don't see that today that much.
And it is strange, because I think, and partially I do think there's a little bit of the commercialism, and we're all culpable. It's not saying, and it's not meant as a disparagement to anybody, because that's what it is. It's gift giving and trying to show your love for everybody, but exactly what you said. But and partly, I will say, there's the caveat of being a music director. I have to start thinking of Christmas early, and priests do too, where you're prepping. When is this going to happen? When is this? You think about it so early, but you're exactly right. By the time that it finally rolls around, it's no longer a blessing, it's a burden. And that actually makes me sad sometimes to think. And I still get excited, and I'm still happy on Christmas, even everything in Christmas Day, but it is I just ran a marathon. Now I need to go to bed.
And I know, and you've told me this in the past too, is, basically, Christmas isn't a very celebratory day for you a lot.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of comes into what I'm talking about in gathering. And all of a sudden, you don't spread it out, visiting relatives and friends and having, Christmas parties and whatnot all through this time, but they all kind of have to be poop on Christmas Day. And you got to go here, you got to go there. You're running like crazy, and you don't have any time to enjoy, to share with one another.
That's such a good point of the idea of actually being able to spread it out versus exactly what you said because it is. And any time that family members get married and kids go, well, I have to go to this person's place, but I can only be here for an hour. Well, honey, will you eat something? No, I mean, I will because I don't want to be rude, but I then also have to go to this person's house because I need to make sure that, oh, honey, will you eat something? Well, I really shouldn't, but I guess I will. Okay, well, now I have to hit this person's house.
Right.
You're right. And the idea of it being spread out, it's funny because the last pastor at St. Christopher's used to have a saying of looking at Christianity through the lens of checking a box. And he always used to say, in my day when I was in school, a check meant you're doing it wrong on a piece of paper. And it does seem sometimes, and again, no disparagement, because holidays are such a tough time. There's no aspersion cast on anybody with it. But it feels so much like, well, I have to check this box. I have to make sure that this person's taken care of. I have to make sure I said hi to this person. I have to make sure I sent the Christmas card to that person. I have to make sure. And there's so much that it becomes, you almost don't even have time to appreciate the season itself and the message of the season. And I'm not one that's saying, oh, you should get rid of the secular parts, because I think the secular parts come from the religious parts of I want to care for all my family.
And they do blend together. They are a part of one another. But, I think even more than the commercialism is this American attitude. Maybe it's become a whole Western civilization attitude of, well, I can't take too much time off. I can't rest. I can't, I gotta work. I gotta get to work. I gotta get this done. I gotta get that done. I gotta get this done, which, is a part of our lives. And so, we find it in studies that say Americans take less time off than our European contemporaries for vacations, and a lot of times we don't even take all of our vacation time.
And it disappears. But it's so interesting because you are so right in that this seems like it's not a hard left turn. It's piggybacking on what you said, because I talk to so many priests. And philosophically, the biggest conversation, and now I've been doing church, obviously not as long as you, but 17 years.
Right.
Pretty much exactly the half point of my life. And for 17 years, I have heard Lutheran pastors, UCC pastors, Presbyterian pastors, Catholic priests all say the same thing. Why aren't people coming to church? Why aren't people coming to church? Why aren't people coming to church? And each year that passes, it seems like less and less. And my biggest thing that I always try and say, coming as a millennial, is I don't think it's a lack of faith. I don't think it's a hatred of religion. I do think that there's sometimes I don't feel like I belong here that some young people feel. But the biggest thing that I think we sometimes don't acknowledge is I think it's the straight, simple answer of, I'm just so tired. I've been running and running and running and running. And imagine being an adult. I remember when I was a kid and I started really getting involved in theater. My grandfather said, that is absolutely fine. If you are, you need to stop piano lessons. You can't do both. You don't have the time. We don't have the time as a family. You can't do both. And I feel like now it's, well, we got to do the piano lessons on Monday, the dance lessons on this, the tennis lessons on Wednesday. I'm also running here. I'm not a parent anymore. I'm a chauffeur service. I'm going over. I need to make sure that they get some play dates because I need to make sure that they're talking. I need to do my own work and make sure that I'm paying my own bills. I need to maybe talk to some of my own people to make sure that they know. And then Saturday rolls around. Well, I got to do all the grocery shopping for the entire week. I got to make sure that the laundry's done. I got to make sure that, and Sunday comes and it's oh, I should go to church.
But
But I just am so tired. And I think we try and come up with deeper reasons than you're exhausted.
you know, it is so funny in one sense that you talk about that, because in the Middle Ages, the church instituted and multiplied holy days for two reasons. Two reasons. One, that you couldn't fight on holy days. So the warring Christians had to stop and pause on holy days. The other one was to give people some rest, to allow them to stop, to go to medieval fairs, to just, do socializing,
Well, I think
get together, and a religious aspect to it too. Don't I won't deny that. But these things were combined into it.
well, and tying in a little bit with the idea of the 12 days of Christmas, there are people in church who will understand it, but a lot of the times people don't realize it starts on the 25th.
Right.
Or they'll count back and say, oh, well, 25th minus 12, it must be the 13th.
Right.
And not thinking of, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it's not something that I spent a lot of time doing, a lot of research, but I think you were alluding to it a little bit earlier in your conversation, that period of time really was a period off of everything.
Right. People
Very
would
little was done.
People would, take off, but then came the Industrial Revolution, industrial and all of that. It's constant. Had to keep going. No time to stop. And that's what kind of drove it. So, it is. It is what it is, my most hated phrase. But there is a reality that exists there. And people in our own day and age actually need to recapture the ability to rest.
Well,
And I'll kick you on that one.
I admit it. I raised my hand before that it was my fault. But I am one of those because I love work and I'm blessed to do something that I love. But, it's, and we'll kind of semi-cut off here because this, I think, is a topic that could go forever and ever. It's also the idea of hobbies. Nowadays, and tying this in because it's church, it's secular life, it's religious life, it's holiday season life, it's your normal day-to-day life. People don't take hobbies as a hobby anymore. When I took up baking because baking is something that I immensely enjoy. Anytime somebody sees something I bake, the first thing is, well, when are you going to start selling? when are you going to open your bakery, or would I be able to pay? And to an extent, I know that that's a compliment, and it's a very kind compliment. But I won't do it because it's fun.
True, but it's true that you couldn't do that because you eat everything you bake.
Well, that's true too, because I enjoy a lot of what I do bake. I wouldn't make it if I
You bake
didn't.
sweets because you like sweets.
Very much. Very, very, very much. But it seems like so much of what, 10 years ago, it was, I do it because it's fun. Now if you start out with, I do it because it's fun, the next response is, yeah, but why would you do it then? If you're not making money off it, you're not in the hustle, why would you do it? And it feels so much like nowadays, because we're in such a hustle mindset, which I think really does conflict with the spiritual life, it's hard to say, well, I'm doing it for myself. And I think that ties into church, into spiritual life, into prayer life, because it becomes, well, can't you find a better use of your time? Why would you pray? You could be making money right now if you just did blah, 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 blah. And I do think that eats away at people.
Well, it does. And that's why, it leads me to something else, which I'm not going to go into because you're right. We could go on forever. And I'm sure we've gone way over our time limit.
But you know what? I guess the thing is, to wrap it up with a final thought on more of a positive thing, take time for yourself maybe this Advent. Take time to actually do nothing, to maybe think, to have a moment of prayer, to go to church for not for the church's sake, but for your sake. I think take an actual moment or an hour of St. Christopher's and OLC. I know are the two that we have that I think are open just for meditative prayer every day, and just go for an hour of nothing. Maybe not even an hour, 10 minutes of I'm just going to sit, and not because I need to for the church's sake, not because I need to for anyone's sake, for me. I'm going to sit, I'm going to pray, I'm going to listen, I'm going to relax.
I just correct you on one thing there. It isn't nothing.
Well, yes.
It isn't nothing. You are presenting yourself to God and giving yourself an opportunity to hear, to think, to put things together with God's guidance, or just put together your own spiritual thoughts, which is so necessary. Sometimes we just keep on running like a machine, and we got to stop that.
So, thank you. We hope to see you next week. We have lots of things, and as we say, and we're going to say at the end of every episode, if you have other topics you would like to see us talk about, to work on, to address, to just banter back and forth, because if we're thinking this, chances are many of you may be thinking the exact same things, and hearing it can be helpful. And we hope that this does help you as well.
If you want to challenge us.
Please do. There's nothing we like more. But anyway, have a blessed Advent season, and thank you so very, very much.
Yes, thank you for inviting us into your homes. Have a good day.